Our story begins in the urban district of Hinshaw, where a young man named Jake opened a small appliance repair shop. To drum up some business, he wrote a rather ambitious claim on his sign: "We repair everything, even space stations." He even listed aircraft carriers and submarines, boasting that if it used electricity, he could fix it. He never actually imagined, of course, that a high-ranking military official would ever take him seriously. One afternoon, while he was fighting off boredom, a woman with a striking presence and a sharp gaze walked in. She looked at him and asked if it was true that he could really repair anything at all. Jake confidently replied that it was, asking if she hadn't seen the advertisement outside. The sign promised repairs for nuclear carriers, component replacements for space stations, and even bulk discounts. It was a lifetime guarantee for any job, no matter how large the vessel or the machine. He jokingly asked if she was there to have a nuclear submarine or an aircraft carrier serviced. The woman, however, was clearly in no mood for jokes or light-hearted banter. She simply placed a heavy case on the table and clicked it open without a word. Inside sat an object that, at first glance, looked like a very sophisticated battery. It was nestled in protective foam, featuring a series of thin lines and tiny crystals that were intricately arranged. The components were woven together in complex, delicate patterns that defied ordinary logic. As soon as he saw the device, Jake straightened up sharply, his casual attitude vanishing instantly. He realized he was looking at a lithography machine, or at least a vital part of one. To be more precise, it was the calibration sensor module from a high-end lithography system. She explained that a power surge during an experiment had fried the core probe array. Her project team was in desperate need of it, and they needed it fixed immediately. Her name was Sarah, a lead researcher at the National Institute of Science and Technology. The damage had been caused by a sudden accident during a high-stakes experiment. The equipment was severely compromised, bringing the entire project to a grinding halt. Several top-tier national institutions had already reviewed the damage and explicitly stated that this machine was impossible to repair in the short term. If she weren't completely desperate, she never would have come to this tiny shop to test her luck. Jake looked at the part and asked, with a hint of disbelief, if this was really a lithography machine. He suggested she might have the wrong place, as he only ran a simple appliance repair shop. He even jokingly suggested the hardware store next door, which earned him a very cold look from Sarah. To her, he seemed like someone who hadn't seen much of the world, and her last bit of hope vanished. With a heavy sigh, she picked up the case and prepared to leave. After all, if the national experts couldn't fix it, the situation was likely hopeless. How could a back-alley repair shop succeed where the greatest minds in the country had failed? Jake quickly dropped the act. 6 months ago, he had arrived in this world and inherited this shop. More importantly, he had become linked to a mysterious wireless repair system. Over the past few months, he had encountered all sorts of strange and unusual devices. However, none of those previous jobs had been quite as significant as this one. An object as advanced as a lithography machine was in a league of its own. He realized this was a serious challenge, noting that the component she held appeared to belong to a high-end C6 model lithography system. Sarah's words came to a sudden halt, her skepticism replaced by pure shock. She demanded to know how he could possibly know that, asking for the quality pulse specs. She pressed him on the nanosecond duration and whether the probe array was the only damage. At that moment, Sarah's breath hitched as she stared at the humble shopkeeper. She could hardly believe her ears. A simple repair shop owner was actually capable of asking such highly technical and professional questions. To be honest, the details he was casually mentioning were considered top-secret information. She confirmed the pulse quality was indeed 15 times the standard power level. The impact duration lasted roughly 3 to 5 nanoseconds, she explained. As for the other components, the self-diagnostic tests showed they were functioning normally. Jake noted it could be fixed, though he warned her the price wouldn't be cheap. Sarah insisted money was no object. If he could fix it, she'd secure the funds immediately. He gave a faint smile and held up 5 fingers to signal his price. Sarah nodded, assuming he meant $5 million for such a critical task. She grit her teeth, knowing that while the price was steep, her options were non-existent. She had no room to bargain, yet she wondered what he was truly thinking. Jake looked confused, asking if she really thought he meant $5 million when he meant 500. He wasn't interested in haggling, explaining that the component had a fundamental quality flaw. Repairing such a piece, he noted, would consume a massive amount of electricity. Sarah stood there in disbelief, wondering if he was truly serious about only charging 500. Sarah was completely stunned, feeling as though her entire perception of reality had been turned upside down. She quickly pulled out her phone and scanned the payment QR code before he could change his mind. The transaction went through successfully, and Jake received his first payment of $500. He grinned from ear to ear. Slowly, he pulled on a pair of shop gloves and laid a relatively clean white cloth over the table before carefully removing the module from its case. It was time for the system to get to work, which, naturally, was where the real magic happened. In the very next second, detailed information began to flicker across the screen right in front of him. A reparable object was detected, a C7 lithography machine calibration sensor module. The damage level sat at 88%, and the analysis for the repair plan was already complete. After preparing everything, he turned around and pulled a military green box down from the high shelves. The moment that box was opened, Sarah's eyes nearly popped out of her head in sheer disbelief. She stared at the contents, wondering what on earth these things could possibly be. She couldn't help but wonder, what kind of strange, unbelievable tools were these? The sight was so bizarre that she simply could not believe her eyes. She kept asking herself, what on earth these things could possibly be? What kind of objects were they? What kind of strange items were these? What kind of things were they? What kind of things were they? What kind of objects were these? What kind of things were they? What kind of things were they? What kind of things are these? 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 Of appliances. Jane, have you lost your mind? That is a lithography machine. Director, I am not lying. It really is fixed. The main sensor and the micrometer level driving circuits have been repaired, and the precision has even increased by a full percentage point. David stayed silent for a long moment before speaking slowly. Where are you? I'm coming to pick you up right now. On the way, the research institute's car flew frantically down the road. David, who was driving, had a grim face and a box in his arms, with every nerve in his body strained to the absolute limit. She knew that the director was already on the verge of an explosion, but in her mind, she kept seeing that calm expression on his face and those tools that looked like literal scrap metal. She even suspected she might be dreaming. Outside the research institute, a crowd of researchers from various teams had gathered. The car had barely come to a stop at the gate before people rushed toward it. Jane, how is it? Is the module fixed? Where is it? They shouted. Get it out quickly. Our project simply cannot wait any longer. Fixed? Is it really fixed? Yes, it's already been repaired. What do you mean, fixed? And where exactly did you fix it? The professionals had told them the shortest wait would be several months. Yet here it was, done in hours. Did you take it to an appliance repair shop? Upon hearing that, the entire crowd took a sharp, cold breath of disbelief. An appliance shop? This is a lithography machine, for heaven's sake. What were you doing at an appliance repair shop with this? Isn't this complete nonsense? Jane, have you actually lost your mind? Are you really taking the entire Science Institute of the Long family this lightly? At this, the tears she had been holding back began to fall. All right, everyone be quiet. Jane, are you absolutely sure it is fixed? She nodded her head, though her mind was currently a total blank. Fine, take the equipment to clean lab number 1 for the official test. If it truly is repaired, you will have done a magnificent job. If it isn't fixed, prepare yourself for a military tribunal. The warning hung heavy in the air. At this point, we see they could only place their hope in a repair shop owner, who seemed entirely unreliable. Inside clean lab number 1, the atmosphere was tense. Several professionals in protective suits carefully removed the module from its case. They prepared for the test. My God, what kind of craftsmanship is this? One whispered. These repaired circuits are simply too beautiful to be real. Jane, did you find some hidden master we don't know about? It looks brand new, as if it came straight from the original factory. No, it's even more perfect than the original. There aren't even any traces of a repair. It wasn't long before everyone in the room began to offer a chorus of stunned praise for the work. The director raised his head, looking a bit bewildered as he glanced at the crowd. No, this material isn't right. It doesn't match our records. Analyze this material immediately. It seems we don't have this repair substance here. Yes, director. The materials team began activating their instruments without delay. As they began to fully scan and analyze the repaired section of the module, Jane felt her heart climb into her throat once again. To be honest, she was terrified. Director, our database shows that, for the moment, we don't have this material on file. What? He barked. It's not even in the global database. It's already the year 2026, and there are still materials that haven't been discovered. Quickly, turn on the power for the functional test. The moment of truth had arrived. At this point, David could no longer hide the joy swelling in his heart. Everyone else quickly scrambled to their positions, ready for the final moment. The power system self-check was completed, showing absolutely no anomalies. Internal logic unit detection was finished, and again, everything was perfect. The energy test concluded with all values remaining well within the controllable range. One after another, lines of green text flashed across the large screen. Each chime of the system felt like a heavy hammer blow to their hearts. A module previously declared physically fried was actually passing every single self-check procedure. One researcher whispered that this simply wasn't scientific. It defied all logic. The director barked in order to hurry up and perform the precision test. David sank into his chair, his legs finally giving way beneath him. It was as if the man were half exhausted from the sheer emotional weight. Suddenly, a researcher reported that the values weren't quite right. Those words caused Jane to slowly lose her composure as she stood nearby. She clenched her hands so tightly that the sweat from her palms soaked her sleeve. Was there really a problem after all? David was equally stunned by the news. He bolted upright. What was wrong? Was there some kind of error? This appeared to be a highly advanced lithography machine module, after all. The performance value had actually increased by a full percentage point over their previous records. He suspected this wasn't their module, yet no one on Earth possessed this level of technology. The performance had jumped by a full percentage point, leaving David and everyone else feeling as if they had been struck by lightning. Some who saw the results nearly fainted on the spot, while the rest of the room erupted in a wave of pure excitement. As we watch the data rolling across the massive screen, we see Jane standing to the side, still looking at everyone in a complete daze. She found herself wondering if their lithography machine's calibration module had actually been repaired. The director told her to forget the word repaired. It was far more than that. This wasn't just a simple fix. It was a massive technological breakthrough, and he told Jane she had done a magnificent job. Her mind went blank as she stood there, still struggling to process the sudden shift from the cold thread of that earlier letter. She was confused. How could she have done a great job when she was supposed to be facing a military tribunal? In the blink of an eye, her fate had flipped from disgrace to glory, and the director, Mike, turned to her with a new proposal. He told her that given her outstanding performance in securing this vital technology, and her ability to overcome research difficulties, he was appointing her as the new leader of the research team. At this point, Jane had truly begun to doubt her own ears. Getting into the National Institute was already the ceiling for most people, but becoming a team leader was a dream she hadn't expected so soon. She asked if this was all because of the module repair, finally realizing that the seemingly unreliable young man had been telling the truth. Not only had he repaired the lithography machine's template, but his claim about the 1% precision adjustment was also real. The director urged her to speak up and explain how she did it, now addressing her formally as team leader Jane. He noted that many professional institutions had insisted this part was beyond repair. He asked which military industry or high-level department she had gone to for help. For a breakthrough this significant, he felt he had to personally visit and thank them for their service. Jane insisted she wasn't lying when she said she found a small repair stall, a place where they usually struggle just to fix a television. The director stared at her in disbelief, asking if this was some kind of joke. After all, this was a lithography machine, not a toaster. The others joined in, certain that such a claim had to be a very poorly timed prank. But Jane wasn't joking. She explained that, at the time, she truly had no other choice but to try that little shop. She had been drawn in by a sign hanging on the door that was, to put it mildly, particularly eye-catching. And what did this sign say? It claimed they repaired spaceships and space stations. It boasted of fixing aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines as if they were everyday appliances. The slogan was simple. If it used electricity, there was nothing they couldn't fix. Suddenly, a heavy silence fell over the entire laboratory as they processed this absurdity. Jane continued, describing how the owner used a basic soldering iron and a heat gun to do the work. He even used a glue gun to repair the module, and in the end, he only charged her about $100. Seeing the stunned reactions of her colleagues, her voice grew softer and more hesitant. At this moment, every eye in the room was fixed on Jane, filled with a mix of shock and pure disbelief. A glue gun? To repair one of the most sophisticated machines on the planet? It seemed impossible. The implications were staggering. If someone truly possessed this level of technology, the entire world would be fighting over them. To be honest, a man with that kind of skill wouldn't be working out of a small repair stall. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the director, Mike, immediately stepped forward to take control. He shouted to the room, declaring that this matter was now classified as a top priority state secret. He warned them that anyone who leaked a single word would be tried for espionage. He then ordered the project team to use the new precision settings to manufacture a batch of chips immediately. He wanted to see the physical results in the shortest time possible to prove this wasn't a dream. After making that declaration, Mike turned to Jane and gave her a quick, meaningful signal. He told her not to leave just yet, asking if she still remembered the exact location of that repair shop. She confirmed that she did, and Mike nodded, his mind already racing toward their next move. He told her to take him there immediately to meet the owner, but asked her to wait outside for a moment first. He needed to grab something specific, convinced that if this man could truly fix a lithography machine, he could fix anything. Mike was prepared to give the owner whatever he wanted in exchange for his help. A few minutes later, he was ready. Jane waited until Mike finally came running back, but when she saw what he was cradling in his arms, her heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, she felt a wave of genuine anxiety wash over her. She recognized it instantly. It was a high-level satellite navigation system chip, one of the most sensitive pieces of tech they had. She couldn't believe the director wanted the shop owner to repair something so critical, but not long after, they were on their way. The two of them arrived at the shop by car, and as they walked in, Jane greeted the owner with a familiar smile. The owner looked up, joking that it had been a while, and asking if bringing a stranger meant she was looking for trouble. Jane quickly reassured him, explaining that there was no problem at all with his previous repair. She introduced Mike as a senior member of her family who had heard of the owner's legendary skills and wanted his help. The owner relaxed, figuring that since they weren't there to complain, he could treat them like any other customers. He agreed to do her a favor as a regular and told them to show him what they had brought so he could take a look. Meanwhile, from the moment he stepped inside, Mike had been scanning the workshop with growing disbelief. To be honest, the place was even more modest than he had imagined. He had expected at least some high-end gear. He assumed a place capable of fixing lithography machines would have professional equipment, but here, there was nothing of the sort. In fact, the shop looked far more outdated and primitive than even a standard neighborhood repair stall. Upon hearing that, Mike opened the box he was holding to reveal its contents. He looked at the owner and asked if a delicate piece like this could actually be repaired. The owner took the chip and studied it, while deep down, his internal system began to react. The system quickly scanned the object, identifying it as a high-level satellite navigation chip. It was a specialized encrypted version with a staggering 92% damage rate. The navigation circuit and the main logic gate were both severely compromised. The data buffer had failed completely, leaving the entire component useless. From the moment Mike walked in, the owner knew this older man was no ordinary customer. He hadn't expected a military connection, realizing he was likely being watched very closely. He noted that this was a satellite navigation chip, which was quite a rare find indeed. The main logic gate had blown out, and the data storage area was also completely ruined. It appeared to have been hit by a sudden, massive surge of high-voltage electricity. To be honest, the protection measures on this device were clearly not up to the task. As he finished speaking, a heavy silence settled over the entire workshop. For the first time, a look of genuine shock appeared in Mike's weathered eyes. It seemed the shop owner really knew his stuff, so Mike asked if he could fix it right there. The owner confirmed it could be done, but naturally, the conversation turned to the cost. He immediately held up 5 fingers, waving them right in front of Mike's face. Mike felt a surge of panic, his heart racing as he braced for the price tag. The owner asked for $50,000, which, surprisingly, wasn't $50 million. Even $50 million would have been worth it. He asked if he should pay by cash or scan the code. But the owner quickly corrected him. It wasn't $50,000, it was only $500. Mike was stunned. $500? He couldn't believe his ears. To be honest, that amount wouldn't even cover the cost of the box holding the chip. He felt that such a low price was practically an insult to the country's cutting-edge technology. The owner, however, was indifferent. Either he wanted it repaired for that price, or he didn't. He muttered that researchers like them seemed to make their money far too easily. It would be $500 exactly, and he wouldn't charge a single penny more. Mike quickly agreed, repeating the word repair as if to make sure the deal was real. We see Jake pull out his phone and scan the payment code before the owner could change his mind. At that moment, the director, David, found himself completely at a loss for words. He watched in disbelief as a chip vital to the nation's strategic defense was handled like junk. And here we see a piece of high-level military hardware being accepted for repair for a mere $500. The owner grumbled that if Mike weren't a regular customer, he wouldn't have taken the job at all. He asked them rhetorically if they really thought he was desperate for a measly $500. It was quite a sight, though David's face turned a visible shade of pale with frustration. To the owner, it was a small problem, but this was the core component of an entire satellite system. David wondered how someone who seemed so serious moments ago could suddenly act so dismissive. Jake tried to reassure the director, explaining that the shop owner simply had a unique personality. After all, people with such immense skill often come with an equally difficult temperament. The shop owner didn't care one bit that David's face had turned a deep, bruised purple. He simply walked to the corner. Then, he pulled out another small box. When he opened it, David's heart nearly jumped out of his chest. Inside was an old-fashioned manual drill, looking like it had been scavenged from a long-abandoned dental clinic. There was also an ancient iron and something that looked suspiciously like a primitive coffee maker. If you were to take this entire collection of junk to a scrap dealer, you wouldn't even get $5 for it. David truly couldn't take it anymore. With trembling hands, he pointed at the pile of scrap metal before them. His voice shook as he asked the boss if he really intended to use those things to fix the chip. The owner simply asked if they had a problem with his tools, which, to be honest, was a fair question. He told them that if they didn't like it, they could take the chip back and research it themselves. Clearly, this humble repair shop wasn't big enough for such important guests. Feeling insulted, the owner threw his tools down and sat back amidst the clutter. He looked completely finished with the situation. Mike quickly jumped in, pleading for him to continue the repair. He reminded the owner that they had already paid, while Jane stepped in to act as the mediator. David's face turned bright red, but Jane held him back by force to prevent a scene. The owner gave David a blank stare before casually placing the hot iron onto the delicate chip. At the same time, Jane very skillfully handed him his special magnifying glass. Looking through the lens, David and Jane were about to witness something quite remarkable. They saw an incredible scene. Was this really the technology being used? It looked as if he were giving the chip a permanent wave, and David's hair practically stood on end from the shock. David felt as though his entire career of research had been a waste. Could a hair iron really repair high-tech chips? If this was the case, he wondered what the point of everything he had ever learned actually was. Had he known, he could have simply gone to a local shop and bought an iron for a few dollars. It would have saved him a fortune. He turned to Jane, asking if she was truly certain that this was how one repairs a lithography machine. To him, it looked like nothing more than child's play. It didn't look like a repair at all. He pointed out the dust, but Jane urged him to look closer. She explained that this specific technique was known as ultrasonic materialization suspension. David was baffled by the term, wondering if such a thing even existed. He questioned if it was in any textbook, but the owner didn't bother to pay them any mind. The man took the bow drill, using the dust to meticulously fill and repair the damaged sections of the chip. This sequence of events was, surprisingly, very similar to how a professional lithography module is serviced. However, the materials being used were worlds apart. An electric arc, invisible to the naked eye, stretched from the tip of the tool to the chip's circuitry, precisely mending every single fracture it touched. To David, the whole scene felt far more ridiculous than trying to sew with a silk thread. And just like that, the owner announced it was finished. It seemed almost too easy. He held up the component, confirming it was indeed the Type B satellite navigation chip. David was stunned that it had been fixed so quickly. In any professional institution, it would have taken a team of experts months just to come up with a viable solution. The owner shrugged, asking what else they expected. Perhaps a parade with drums and confetti, followed by a long, boring speech from their corporate leaders. David truly felt like cursing right about now. This young shop owner was clearly capable, but his tongue was incredibly sharp. A single sentence was enough to leave David breathless. We see the man casually tossing several tools back into his box. His relaxed demeanor made the repair look as simple as fixing a rice cooker that wouldn't turn on. A massive wave of absurdity completely washed over David in that moment. He told himself he must be going crazy, or perhaps he was simply dreaming. How could this even be possible? David's face turned bright red instantly. It seemed as though he was even having genuine difficulty catching his breath. The owner asked if the director was all right, noting he was just fixing a little something for them. He jokingly told him not to die there, as he still relied on this small shop for his livelihood. David tried to calm himself, though he was far from being okay. Jane told the director he would have to get used to it, as this was just the boss's standard procedure. Standard procedure. He turned to Jane, asking if she realized how shocking this whole process was for him. He looked at Jane, wondering if she knew just how deeply this series of events had impacted his professional world. He asked Jane again if she understood the weight of what they had just witnessed. Jane, do you have any idea how world-shaking this entire sequence actually was? Of these procedures were for me? Jane, do you have any idea how shocking this entire series of events was for me? Jane, do you realize just how deeply this whole process has impacted me? He asked her again if she understood the weight of what they had just witnessed. Jane, do you know just how shocking this sequence of events was for someone in my position? Jane, do you truly understand how much this entire process has shaken my professional world? Jane, do you realize the sheer impact of what just happened? He couldn't stop questioning if she truly grasped the situation. He repeated the question, his voice filled with disbelief. Did she really understand the gravity of it? To be honest, he felt as though his entire career had been a misunderstanding until this moment. He looked at Jane, desperate for her to acknowledge the absurdity of the shop owner's skill. Jane, do you have any idea how world-shaking this entire sequence actually was? The man was practically sputtering in disbelief, his words a chaotic mess of shock and denial. He couldn't even form a coherent sentence, as if his brain had simply stopped working. After all, he had spent his entire life immersed in the rigorous world of scientific research. We are all witnesses here, he thought, though perhaps there were other reasons for this madness. What kind of mystery could be hidden here? To be honest, the report itself was the greatest mystery. He suggested they should immediately suspend every single research project at the 7th Institute. And naturally, the next step would be to send in a team to investigate the situation. Sam looked at the indignant crowd and let out a long, weary sigh. He realized that this time, Jake had truly picked a fight with the wrong person. At that exact moment, a sharp knock echoed through the meeting room door. The secretary stood there, her face flushed with a mix of excitement and nerves. Minister Sam, she announced, the 7th Institute has just sent over another high-priority report. Jake again. The man felt certain that this would be the final nail in the coffin. He wondered what the report would claim next. Perhaps that they had built a giant robot? Old man Yin let out a cold snort, his expression growing more sour by the second. The report stated that the 7th Institute had just developed a revolutionary new type of chip. It utilized an entirely new scale standard, something completely unheard of in their field. The data showed that the precision was a full percentage point higher than anything seen before. As the words sank in, the entire meeting room fell into an instant, heavy silence. But that silence didn't last long, as the atmosphere in the room exploded into pure chaos. A full percentage point. To be honest, it was a concept that defied everything they knew. Hurry up and give me that report, Old Man Yin demanded, his eyes wide with disbelief. He practically lunged for the document and spent several minutes scanning it with intense focus. Suddenly, his entire body began to tremble, leaving the others wondering what could possibly be wrong. Are you all right, Yin? They asked, assuming the data itself couldn't be the problem. But how is any of this possible? People can lie, after all. Data, however, is far more honest. He had been a man of science for so many years that he could spot even the slightest error in a dataset almost instantly. Yet, as we see here, the data in this specific report was undeniably authentic. I've been saying this all along, one colleague noted, pointing out that Director Mike had been in charge for years, and he was certainly not the type of man to break the rules or fabricate results. Still, the whole matter felt far too mysterious. Perhaps they had been building up to this for a long time, reaching a peak where, by some incredible coincidence, a massive breakthrough finally occurred. A coincidence? A full percentage point jump is hardly what one would call a coincidence. Sam ignored the bickering crowd, quickly grabbing the report to review the details for himself. After a moment, his gaze locked onto that impossible 1.2% advancement and the specifications of the new chip. "Gentlemen," he said, "this data is simply indisputable." This proved that Mike's report was definitely not a fabrication, which changed everything. But now, a new question arose. The real mystery lay within that small repair shop. Sam took a deep breath, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. But more than that, it was sheer blindness. An appliance repair shop, run by a local expert? Or perhaps a family craft? These words seem ordinary enough, but an appliance repair shop actually being able to fix lithography machines? It was, quite frankly, absurd. The most important thing, however, was that he actually succeeded in fixing it. "Minister Sam, I have a feeling this simply can't be true," one official remarked. "We are talking about a lithography machine module, after all. How could such a thing possibly come from a simple appliance repair shop? A lithography module is the very core of the core, the heart of the entire system. The countries capable of repairing them can be counted on one hand, which makes this even stranger. Perhaps this is just a trick by Director Mike to deceive the rest of us. Or maybe this so-called repair shop is actually one of Director Mike's secret bases." It was even possible that Director Mike was simply covering up the truth. A number of scholars present began to frown, their skepticism growing by the second. The meeting room suddenly became noisy again as the debate reignited. The chip's achievements had shocked them, but the more surprised they became, the more curious they grew regarding the nature of this mysterious repair shop. This appliance repair shop was becoming the center of everyone's attention. "We must understand it. So, Leo, help me organize a small team immediately. Go find this shop and see for yourself if such a place truly exists. Remember, you must be careful." The next day, our protagonist calmed his nerves and reopened his shop. The day before, our protagonist, Jake, had actually fainted right there in his shop. It was a good thing the ambulance arrived when it did. Otherwise, the meager earnings he had just made would have vanished into medical bills. Suddenly, two middle-aged men blocked the entrance to the shop. The pair stood tall with serious expressions, though they were dressed like ordinary citizens. However, their entire demeanor was completely different from that of a normal person. The only thing missing was the phrase, "undercover officer," written across their foreheads. He wondered if the two of them were filming some sort of hidden camera television show. After stepping inside, the two men began to scan their surroundings carefully. To be honest, they didn't look like they had come to get anything repaired at all. Well, he had sent one person to the hospital yesterday, and now two more had arrived. His tiny shop was practically becoming a popular meeting spot for mysterious strangers. He greeted them as the owner, noting that he had just opened for the day. He asked what they needed fixed, perhaps an imported washing machine that stopped working, or a double-door refrigerator that wouldn't cool. Then, they asked if he could fix a specific item. One of the men placed a small, peculiar object onto the counter. The item was positioned with great care. It even came in surprisingly expensive packaging. He looked at it, wondering if it was a teacher's old MP3 player or perhaps a charger. The man confirmed it, claiming it was indeed a music player belonging to a professor. He asked if Jake could repair it, though he doubted any music player truly looked like that. They were truly trying to fool a ghost. As soon as the two men stepped inside, Jake had already mentally cataloged every single object they were carrying on them. What remained to be seen was how they intended to play this out. He avoided showing any suspicion, maintaining his professional shopkeeper persona. And since this was clearly a high-stakes situation, they were forced to act naturally, obviously. Usually, it is important to date the components and finish the work in the facility, but this time, he didn't even take out his tools. He simply used his fingers to tap the listening device a few times, the sound rhythmic and slow, making it look as though he were just tapping it idly. But the two men watching the scene were already sweating profusely. Deep down, they realized he was tapping out an emergency reassembly sequence. Well, they could hear it clearly. This was a national-level listening device, after all. This specific type of sequence is meant to reset the internal sensor without exposing the hardware. Yet here was a simple man who repaired household appliances doing exactly that. How did he know that this would fix it? Just as the two men felt a wave of shock hit them, the red light on the device in Jake's hand began to flicker back to life. All right, it's done. He had solved the problem in seconds. He casually remarked that these kinds of things just need a little adjustment to work again. That will be $20. Would they like to scan a code or pay in cash? He tossed the listening device directly back onto the table with total indifference. He held up two fingers toward them, leaving both men completely stunned. The men were speechless. How did he know? Well, he hadn't exactly explained it yet. He claimed it was an ancestral skill, one his grandfather used to cure the villagers' ailments. But speaking of which, he addressed the two bosses directly with a sharp look. They had handed him this listening device and told him it was just an MP3 player. Wasn't that a bit dishonest? If he were to actually take this bug apart right now and break it while pretending it was a music player, whose fault would that be? The hair on the back of their necks stood up instantly. They were caught. Their bodies felt weak, as if they had been struck by a sudden bolt of lightning. They had assumed this young man knew nothing, but he had understood everything from the moment. They walked in. Both of them were now sweating profusely, which was quite a sight. Their faces turned a shade of red that was, frankly, impossible to ignore. Jake told them to stop the nonsense. It was $20, after all. He told them to transfer the money quickly and not to even think about stealing. The whole city was monitored, he reminded them. They stammered, agreeing to pay immediately. The two men nodded repeatedly as Sam pulled out his phone and scanned the code. With the payment done, Jake asked if they had anything else to do or if they were leaving. He looked at them with a strange expression, as if wondering why they were still there. They realized it was time to go, and they needed to go right now. The two of them grabbed the device and fled the small shop as fast as they could. And just like that, Jake remained in the shop, still very much in control of the situation. However, as soon as they stepped out of the small shop, the two brothers sat in their car and took a deep, shaky breath. They immediately called Minister Scott. "It's us," they said. He asked them how the situation was looking. Did that repair shop actually exist? They confirmed they found it, and it was real. But the person inside was a bit strange, far stranger than they had imagined. The moment they walked through the door, they had fallen right into his trap. He didn't just see through their ruse. He knew the exact encrypted unlocking method. He was familiar with their specific encryption, which, naturally, was quite impossible. How could that be? That listening device was supposed to be top-tier technology. When was it even developed? It was designed for high-level international intelligence work. They assured Minister Scott that every word they were saying was the absolute truth. The owner of that little repair stall was truly an enigma. It wasn't clear yet if he was someone they could actually handle. We moved now to the hospital, where the sharp scent of disinfectant filled David's nostrils. The heart monitor beside him emitted a faint, rhythmic, and somewhat lonely sound. "Director, are you awake?" He weakly asked about the chip, their precious chip. "The chip is right here," his assistant replied, quickly grabbing the small box. David looked at it with desperate haste, seeing the chip intact inside. The heavy weight in his chest finally began to lift. He could breathe again. He insisted on leaving the hospital, despite the doctor saying his body wasn't ready. He was told he needed rest, but David insisted this was a critical moment and he had to leave. David fought tenaciously to get back on his feet, hurriedly changing out of his hospital gown, all while tightly clutching the satellite chip as if his life depended on it. It used to be just a piece of junk to him, but now, it was his greatest treasure. He ordered his assistant to get the car, intending to return to the research institute immediately. Soon, their vehicle was passing through the various layers of heavy security at the facility. The car came to a firm halt right at the office doors, and before it even fully stopped, a researcher in a white lab coat came running toward them in a panic. His face was a mask of pure anxiety. Something was clearly very wrong. He informed David that the officials from the Zansu system were already waiting in the lab. David hurried along to see them, wondering why the Zansu team had arrived so suddenly. It was quite a surprise, even for a place used to high-stakes scientific pressure. Apparently, they were there to inspect the new precision chip developed by their lithography machine. They were skeptical of the 1% precision claim and wanted to verify it personally. David's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he heard the chip had actually been finished. The researcher confirmed it was completed shortly after David and the team leader had left. It was a breakthrough, yes, but David demanded to know who authorized the official report. Usually, a report must be foolproof, yet this one was rushed to the Zansu system immediately. To be honest, submitting data on a chip that was barely finished was a massive gamble. If any minor accident occurred now, they would be accused of falsifying scientific research data. And in this world, that is a crime on the same level as falsifying military intelligence. One has to wonder, isn't this just asking for trouble? He told himself it was fine. As a man of his word, he would see it through to the end. They would have to secure the principles first, or else the entire project would come to nothing. He paused, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the data before. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated shock. The test results were baffling, and though the team had explained their findings, nothing seemed to align. The usual effects were gone. These were no longer the standard events they were used to seeing. He reviewed the program data, realizing just how much information had been retrieved during the process. Perhaps the most optimal path was the internal one, even if it meant dealing with these complex realities. It was, quite frankly, a virtual masterpiece of engineering. The most important part was that these optimizations were completed within the original framework. They hadn't damaged a single basic protocol, which, in any normal situation, would be impossible. Director David, can you tell us exactly what is happening in your laboratory? Let's set aside the lithography machine for a moment and focus solely on this chip. Why does this specific structure appear? David listened to the questions with growing unease. The polite, measured words of the officials vanished in an instant, replaced by cold scrutiny. He tried to offer an explanation, but what kind of explanation could he possibly give? To be honest, he didn't even know how to explain the chip's sudden development himself. Elder Yin, distinguished academics, this is a bit complicated to explain. He decided it would be better to present the test data directly, as it was far more intuitive. After all, what explanation could possibly be as impactful as the raw, undeniable facts? We see the newly developed chip being carefully placed into the slot of the platform's test card. A low hum filled the room as the machine hummed to life. the slot locked automatically, and the system began its environmental self-check. The vacuum environment was confirmed as normal, with the temperature holding steady at 21.5 degrees Celsius. The test card's interface activated, glowing with a soft light. First, the system initiated the reference calibration precision test. The response time for the calibration module clocked in at exactly 3.8 seconds. Operation remained stable, with an optical deviation correction rate of 12.5 micrometers per second. It had exceeded the original design index by 1.2%, a small but significant victory. As the unit's report echoed through the crowded room, an immediate uproar broke out. Even this basic data was enough to shock them. Elder Yin, these figures are already quite remarkable, one might even say surprising. Consider the calibration module of our standard lithography machines. The original design correction rate is usually capped at 12.1 micrometers. Elder Yin pressed a button, his face remaining entirely expressionless. He seemed calm as he announced that the reference test had passed. And so, the second stage of high-intensity testing began. Jake also kept a straight face, though he couldn't stop his body from trembling slightly. By this point, Jake had completely surrendered to his anxious and restless heart. The input instruction was finally completed. Immediately, a holographic projection flickered into existence before them. Data began to flood the chip like a rising tide, flowing into the circuits with incredible speed. The system was now mimicking a lithography machine operating under the most extreme conditions. It was performing ultra-high precision exposure while simultaneously handling complex calculations. We see the chip's utilization rate climbing to a staggering 99.6%. The temperature began to climb rapidly, 45 degrees, then 67 degrees. It hit 70 degrees. Success or failure now rested entirely on this single moment. A palpable sense of excitement and dread filled the entire laboratory. The only sound that remained was the constant, frantic swallowing of the onlookers. In previous tests, the moment the temperature left the safety zone, self-protection would kick in. The frequency would drop and performance would weaken, but in this moment, things were different. On the holographic screen, the calibration response time data didn't fall behind at all. It remained perfectly stable at exactly 3.8 seconds. The temperature held steady, even as it reached a scorching 76 degrees. They wondered how it was possible to maintain such heat dissipation power. To be honest, this didn't correspond with their original design at all. Old Man Yin and the others stared at the holographic projection with solemn expressions. This wasn't just a new idea. It had completely subverted their traditional scientific beliefs. In that moment, Zack felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to do something truly grand. He wanted the leaders of the Zanzu system to finally open their eyes and see the truth. He commanded everyone to prepare for the final, most grueling test of all. They were to simulate the lithography machine's operation under conditions of extreme vibration. This included high temperatures and complex electromagnetic interference to perform ultra-precise calibration. The director then called for the long-term error test to begin. The conditions were brutal, extreme vibrations and powerful electromagnetic disturbances. That was the industry standard, but no chip could withstand it for more than a moment. It would be damaged instantly, and his colleagues argued they had already seen enough success. They told him there was no need for more tests, as the results were already perfect. But at this point, Zack seemed possessed by a frantic, almost reckless determination. He refused to listen to anyone, not even to Old Man Yan's warnings. And we must remember, this 7th Research Institute was entirely Zack's territory. He demanded to know if they had heard his orders and told them to execute them immediately. Old Man Yan stood his ground, shouting for the tests to stop and challenging anyone to move. It was clear that Old Man Yin was reaching a point of genuine, unfiltered fury. If such a masterpiece of a chip were ruined by Zack's sudden increase in difficulty, then every single person in that room would be devastated beyond words. The technicians responsible for the testing stood frozen, their hands hovering in the air. We see the sweat from their foreheads beginning to slide slowly down their cheeks. Old Man Yin from the central system flatly refused to allow the test, but Zack insisted on pushing forward regardless. On one hand, they had the central system, which held a higher authority than the research institute itself. On the other, they had their direct leader. To be honest, offending either one was a terrible idea. The researchers from the various units found themselves caught in a truly impossible position. Ultimately, they didn't dare disobey Zack's orders, and the lithography machine, which had just come to a halt, roared back to life once more. We see the holographic data on the screen beginning to flicker and shift. Frantically again, Yin warned Zack that if this experiment failed, a military tribunal would be waiting for him. Zack, acting as if he hadn't heard a single word, simply kept his eyes fixed on the massive display. There, on the glowing holographic projection, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. The data representing the calibration deviation rate was jumping up and down constantly, showing everyone that the chip was now operating under the most extreme conditions imaginable. As it struggled to maintain the optical path calibration, a new figure suddenly appeared on the hologram, revealing the final probability of any deviation. It was a string of zeros, absolutely no errors. Every person in the room suddenly widened their eyes in shock. They wondered if they were hallucinating, but Zack simply demanded they repeat the test yet again. He wanted to do it over. Hearing this, Old Man Yan's face turned a deep, furious shade of red, and he ground his teeth so hard it made an audible, bone-chilling cracking sound. He wondered if Zack was truly intent on destroying this masterpiece of a chip once and for all. Only then, it seemed, would he be satisfied. This time, however, the staff didn't hesitate for a second. And so, we see the holographic projection spring into action for another grueling round. The final result was exactly the same, 0. Once, twice, 3 times they ran the test. And every single time, the result remained a perfect 0. By the 5th time, the shock was palpable, as their previous chips couldn't even survive a single round. The researchers began to wonder if Zack had truly lost his mind. They were standing in what was supposed to be a simple repair shop, after all. But the things being repaired here were nothing short of a miracle. Old Man Yin could no longer contain himself and asked Director Zack where he had found such a god, capable of pushing a lithography machine to such impossible heights. Zack calmly asked if this was enough and if the chip finally met Yan's strict standards. It was more than enough, as Yin quickly conceded to the director. It was, in fact, far beyond what they had hoped for, despite the earlier threats of a military tribunal. Zack, however, felt a bit sensitive about those previous comments. The 7th Research Institute in this wild land was, in his eyes, not a major concern. He wondered why the people from the central system had even bothered to come. It seemed they didn't trust the work, but after 5 perfect tests, they had no choice but to believe. Yin noted that they were all getting older and perhaps shouldn't be so fussy anymore. He then ordered his assistant to go to the trunk of his car. He wanted his finest vintage tea brought out for Director Zack to enjoy as a peace offering. And we see that everyone present was left completely speechless by this sudden turn of events. In the entire documentation center, everyone knew exactly how difficult Old Lady Jane could be. Director Zack, here is the detailed data report from our 5 tests. Please sign it. I'll handle it. I'll handle it. How could I possibly bother Director Zack with such a small matter? Old Lady Jane took the stack of documents from the staff and began to review them carefully. As she read, the smile on her face grew wider and more intense with every page. The data from the 5 tests showed results that were consistently improving. She wondered how the stability of this chip could possibly keep increasing like this. It truly was incredible. Looking at the feedback curve, Jane stared at the stack of data. The more she looked at the numbers, the happier she felt about the whole situation. If they had more data like this, she asked old Zack what else they would even need to do. She asked if this was for real, wondering if a simple repair shop owner truly did this. Old Lady Jane tucked the documents into her briefcase with a look of pure delight. Zack asked if she still didn't believe it, though it wasn't a matter of faith anymore. To be honest, the whole thing was simply too incredible to process at first glance. She insisted he reveal the materials used, as it would be a massive contribution to their cause. Zack agreed to call the shop owner, telling the others to stay quiet while he did. Boss Charlie, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm the uncle of the girl from the other afternoon. I had something fixed in your shop. Do you remember me? Oh, it's you, Charlie replied. He asked if Zack had recovered and why he was calling, but Zack had a different goal. He just wanted to share some good news regarding the lithography module Charlie had repaired. Charlie sounded unimpressed, asking if the news was just some nonsense, and if Zack could tell him something he didn't already know. To fix that foreign engraving machine, he explained that he even had to scrape the lid off an old tin container. He ground it into powder, and honestly, he had originally considered using the lid from a box of dog biscuits instead. Charging only a few $100 for that kind of work was practically doing them a favor, or so he claimed. Everyone in the room stood there absolutely stunned, wondering what on earth they were actually hearing. It seemed Boss Charlie had some very unconventional methods for repairing high-end lithography machines. For the first time, the team began to feel that these multi-million-dollar machines were being treated like cheap toys, scraping bits off a random lid to fix world-class tech. It was an absurdity that left them speechless. Charlie asked if there was anything else, as he was busy. Apparently, the neighbor was waiting for him to fix an electric stove. Before Zack could even process the shock, Charlie simply hung up the phone. And so, the entire laboratory fell into a deathly silence as the weight of that conversation sank in. The staff whispered, asking what the boss had said at the end about fixing an electric stove. They couldn't fathom why a man who could repair a lithography machine was worried about a kitchen appliance. Zack swallowed hard several times and finally managed to respond with great difficulty. He explained that the neighbor was anxious to use the stove for frying. Yes, for frying dinner. Old Lady Jane's eyes glazed over in a daze before her world, quite literally, turned upside down. She collapsed right there, prompting a frantic cry to get her to the hospital immediately. We moved to the hospital room 10 minutes later, where the team anxiously waited for the doctor. The doctor assured them the problem wasn't major. It was just a sudden spike in blood pressure from a shock. He looked at the group and asked, with genuine curiosity, what on earth they had done to her. The doctor warned them that people of her age shouldn't be exposed to such stimulating or shocking news. Zack's heart finally found a moment of peace, though he couldn't help but dwell on those stimulating events. After all, what could be more shocking than a world-class lithography machine being fixed with a tin lid? It was a revelation that, quite frankly, subverted every scientific principle they had ever known. The team began to wonder what kind of person this repair shop owner actually was. One of the researchers turned to Zach, asking if they could possibly contact the boss again. They desperately wanted to know exactly what brand of tin lid could somehow repair a lithography machine. They insisted this was vital information, urging Zach not to keep such a secret to himself. This discovery could benefit the entire country, they argued, trying to put his mind at ease. Zach assured them he wasn't worried about who got the credit. He knew they weren't trying to steal his glory. The real problem, he explained, was that the boss had a difficult temperament and didn't care for their titles. In Charlie's eyes, they were nobody special, so they would have to wait for the perfect moment to approach him. He promised to eventually convince him to work for the state, and seeing the logic, the group finally nodded in agreement. We moved to the following afternoon, where the sun was lazy and the morning's work was finally winding down. Charlie sat back with a toothpick in his mouth, hands resting on his chair, wondering what to have for dinner. And that was when a friendly greeting suddenly drifted in from the door, calling out to him. It was the neighbor, asking if he'd eaten yet, and pointing toward the broken electric stove she'd brought over. She nudged him again about the meal, hoping he could take a quick look at her induction cooker. She had just finished making some braised meat and invited him to come over and have a taste. Charlie thanked her, knowing that when it came to home-cooked flavor, her skills were hard to beat. He mused that even with 800 seasonings in a restaurant, nothing quite matches that home-cooked taste. With just a bit of soy sauce and care, the flavor was perfect, and he made sure to thank her. She insisted that since he never charged for his repairs, a good meal was the least she could offer. Mrs. Smith chatted away, noting that his skills were far superior to any official repair service. Meanwhile, across town in the Central Systems headquarters, news was reaching the office of Director Song. Two men stood before Director Song, their heads bowed so low they were nearly touching the floor. The director sat behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable and his posture perfectly still. With a straight back, he stared at the object on his desk, the very item Charlie had recently repaired. It was a Black Pigeon microphone, a piece of high-end military hardware that shouldn't even be in a civilian shop. Its encryption sequence was grade A, utilizing their most advanced and proprietary core technology. Several research institutes had struggled with this tech for ages before finally making any progress. And yet, they had allowed a simple repair shop owner to get his hands on it. They were asked how long it took this little boss to crack the encryption. The answer was 5 minutes. No, to be precise, it was barely 6. To an outsider, a military microphone might look like a simple music player, which is a comforting thought. But Charlie had bypassed the casing and gone straight to the heart of the device. He had even managed to activate the discarded Black Pigeon system, something they thought was impossible. It seemed as though he knew exactly what he was looking at from the very first moment. Working in a shop with no tools, he had dismantled a top-secret device as if it were a common toy. The story sounded like pure science fiction, and a heavy, stunned silence suddenly filled the entire office. Director Song leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and breathed steadily. But his mind was racing, wondering if there were hidden radio waves at play. He questioned if there was something special about the shop, though he doubted it. It appeared to be a perfectly ordinary repair shop, covered in oil stains and spare parts. The place was filled with electrical conductors and was, to be honest, quite a mess. We see that his men had repeatedly searched the shop from the moment they entered. They hadn't found a single hidden compartment or any piece of high-tech equipment. Director Song took a deep breath, his eyes clouding with a sense of disappointment. He couldn't fathom why someone capable of cracking a Black Pigeon device at will would be willing to spend their days in such a cluttered, dusty little repair shop. The situation was strange, and he wondered if Charlie was actually a secret weapon belonging to Director Miller. But that didn't seem right. It made very little sense. If Charlie were Miller's trump card, Miller certainly wouldn't have reported him. Just as the tension in the office became almost unbearable, there was a sudden knock. An aide rushed in, announcing that Miller hadn't lied to them after all. That incredible 1% precision they had heard about was actually real. Director Song grabbed the stack of papers, demanding to know where they got the report. After scanning the pages for a moment, his brow furrowed in immediate concern. The old man had already taken the findings to the 7th Research Institute. This report had been pulled directly from there, and the results were undeniable. Director Song looked at the report, and the conclusion was remarkably simple. Could they finally announce a global breakthrough in the field of lithography machines? He asked where the old man was and why he hadn't returned with the team. As it turned out, the old man had been hospitalized. Hospitalized? He wasn't actually ill. He had simply become so overwhelmed by the report that he fainted. According to the doctor, his excitement caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. Director Song found himself completely speechless at the news. The tough old veteran of the past had actually been defeated by a chip report. It was the breakthrough they needed to finally close the gap with the West. The day had finally arrived, but just then, the desk phone began to ring. He answered, greeting General Miller and asking about a man named Charlie. He listened for a moment before stating that it was absolutely out of the question. He knew everyone wanted to catch Charlie, but he questioned if this was a violation. No, absolutely not, he repeated as soon as the call was connected. Director Song refused again and again, his expression growing more frustrated by the second. He told the general that it wasn't a lack of will, but a lack of ability to help. Charlie was a versatile soldier, a true nightmare for every commander during military exercises. The man never played by the rules, which, naturally, made him impossible to predict. His tactics were so cunning they were downright infuriating to those in charge. Just last year, an entire elite tank corps had been completely humiliated by him. He hadn't even covered half of the training area before the situation took a turn. The director declared him dead without any warning while Charlie was still in the middle of his drills. In this game, the most important rule is that there simply are no rules. The upcoming military exercises were designed with a very specific and rather difficult goal in mind. They were focused primarily on simulation and counterattacks, operating in a completely lawless environment. After all, we cannot expect to use the armies of yesterday to fight the wars of the future. The general pleaded for help, insisting that this time, they absolutely had to catch Charlie. Director Song sighed, explaining to his old friend that it wasn't a lack of desire, but the army has its regulations. The Research Institute, he reminded him, had its own strict set of rules to follow. They were two entirely different systems, and one couldn't simply take equipment from the lab on a whim. As they approached the Army's radar platform, Director Song felt a visible tremor of nervous energy. If this plan actually worked, he knew the weight of the consequences would fall squarely on his shoulders. These exercises weren't meant to just test the equipment, but to push it to its absolute breaking point. By that stage, it was only a matter of time before he began to doubt his own decisions. The general argued that while rules are static, people are not, and they needed to adapt. He begged the director for help just this once, hoping their long history would count for something. He even offered to send over some of the finest soldiers he had recently finished training. He promised to station them at the port and even throw in a few bottles of his 20-year-old vintage. Director Song stood firm, noting he already had guards and certainly wasn't lacking for wine. The general tried a more personal approach, asking if he could call him brother while inquiring about laser weapons. The general pleaded for just a little help, promising not to make things difficult, even if it stayed within the lab. He claimed that any machine with even a bit of potential would do just fine. There was a distinct note of desperation in the old soldier's voice as he spoke. Director Song, for his part, began to feel the pressure as sweat formed on his brow. He understood perfectly well what these military exercises meant to the men on the ground. He argued that if they used his advanced equipment, the entire purpose of the training exercise would be lost. The general scoffed, asking if being utterly humiliated by superior tech could really be called training. He described supersonic missiles and drone swarms that felt like something straight out of a science fiction movie. His current radars couldn't even track them before the director notified him that the exercise was already over. In a final attempt, he asked if he could at least have some precision guidance chips. He joked about putting them on his own head, but deep down, he knew that wasn't an option. Director Song stood his ground, reminding General Miller that this was a matter of strict principle. The general, clearly reaching his limit, told him he was far too stubborn and threatened to settle the score later. With that, Miller slammed the phone down, ending the conversation with a sharp click. Song sat there in a daze, realizing he had likely offended his old friend completely this time. We move now inside the laboratory of the 7th Research Institute. The roar of machinery fills the air as researchers in white coats hurry back and forth with purpose. One staff member asked what Director Song was up to, surprised by the sudden influx of new projects. Another replied that the director had apparently repaired the South Star 3 and wanted to test its performance. This was quite a surprise, considering the South Star 3 was a project the aerospace system had nearly discarded. The staff wondered where Director Song had gotten it fixed this time, suspecting that same old repair shop. They found it hard to believe a simple shop could actually repair something as complex as the South Star 3. The team felt a bit dazed, as that mysterious little shop seemed to be appearing in every conversation lately. The work hadn't stopped for a second, and everyone was being rotated through shifts to keep up. A supervisor snapped at them to stop gossiping and hurry up with their tasks. Director Song was expected to arrive at any moment, and the atmosphere in the lab shifted instantly. We see Song enter through the heavy doors, wearing a protective suit and carrying a small, unassuming box. He asked his lead engineer, Watson, for a status report on the current preparations. Watson confirmed everything was ready for the South Star 3 Global Satellite Navigation System test. The high-precision atomic synchronization chip test was officially about to get underway. The South Star 3 chip was initialized and the target was successfully locked into the system. They activated the simulated interference signal to see how the hardware would hold up. At intensity level 5, the signal report flickered slightly, a moment of tension for everyone watching. This 5G interference was designed to simulate the most hostile electronic environments soldiers might face. In such an environment, even the most advanced navigation systems are usually rendered completely blind. With a calm nod, the director gave the final word to begin the demonstration. Following Song's order, a drone began to lift off and move across the testing field. On the side of the projection screen, we see all the drone's detailed flight parameters updating in real time. The digital display tracked every movement as the drone navigated the simulated environment. Suddenly, the situation changed drastically as various data points began to climb at a frantic pace. Countless chaotic signals began to swarm, intertwining and directly enveloping the drone. The drone, which had been perfectly stable just a moment ago, was now struggling. It started to wobble as alarms blared, showing that the flight path had drifted off course. Director Song looked at the data on the screen, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. Was it a failure? Well, to be honest, the world is usually quite fair in its limitations. The fact that Charlie was able to repair a lithography machine was already a miracle. Expecting him to also fix the South Star satellite navigation system was perhaps asking too much. He clearly wasn't a specialist here, though his ability to fix the lithography machine was incredible. It was already a godlike feat, but just as Song lowered his head in disappointment, a sudden gasp of shock echoed through the testing room. He snapped his head up and saw a third set of data appearing on the holographic screen. According to the label, this was coming from a self-correcting spoofing algorithm. It had stripped away the drone's corrupted data and anchored it with a dark pearl sequence. Then, it seamlessly integrated a completely new set of its own algorithms. Finally, the data on the large screen stabilized, becoming perfectly still and precise. High above, the drone was now circling in the sky with absolute safety. The engineers wondered what this was, as the South Star satellite shouldn't have such a feature. The satellite didn't have it, of course, but Charlie certainly did. Director Song let out a smile, looking extremely proud of his mysterious find. He remembered Charlie mentioning that he had modified the internal algorithm himself. But Director Song never imagined that Charlie's small modification would allow the drone to survive such a chaotic environment. He found himself wondering what on earth was going on inside that young man's head. If he could only bring him to the research institute, his own career would truly take flight. The others wondered what kind of person this shop owner was, and if there was anything he couldn't fix. A wave of curiosity swept through the room. First, the lithography module was repaired, and now this. The South Star No. 3 chip was also functioning perfectly, which was quite the feat. Everything Charlie touched seemed to come back better than new, accompanied by a series of thrilling data reports. Suddenly, the entire testing room fell into a heavy, contemplative silence. Everyone stood there, utterly stunned, realizing these datasets represented more than just a simple success. This was an unprecedented breakthrough in the history of the country's scientific research. Meanwhile, Joe took out his phone and quickly dialed a familiar number. He greeted Charlie, excitedly bringing up the news about the South Star No. 3 chip. Charlie joked that the chip had nearly died in his shop, showing his usual dry humor. He asked why Joe was calling, wondering if the payment had arrived, though Joe had other news. Joe explained that the chip Charlie fixed was now stable within a fraction of a millimeter. These were incredibly significant figures, but Charlie simply asked if there was anything else. Joe spoke with visible excitement, yet Charlie remained perfectly calm on the other end of the line. Joe asked if he wasn't surprised by the data, or perhaps even a little impressed by the results. Charlie asked why he should be surprised, wondering if Joe took him for some kind of amateur. He had his professional integrity, after all, and he certainly hadn't taken those few $100s for nothing. Joe quickly tried to apologize, insisting he didn't mean it that way before hanging up the phone. He felt a bit dazed, almost as if he had accidentally walked into a trap of his own making. The director asked if he was all right, and Joe assured him that everything was perfectly fine. He ordered the chip to be packed immediately, as he intended to head straight to the aviation department. We should remember that the South Star No. 3 chip originally came from that very system. At the time, they claimed it was beyond repair, which was exactly how Joe got his hands on it. Meanwhile, across town, a military vehicle was racing through the streets at top speed. Its destination was the same, the headquarters of the aviation system. In the back seat, a man sat with a grim expression that could chill the air around him. He was fuming, thinking that Director Song had the memory and foresight of a goldfish. It seemed that in this critical moment, a difficult choice had been made. The director had opted not to help, which, to be honest, was a rather bold move. Fine then, he would go directly to the aviation department himself to settle the matter. He was going to find Zach, who ran this specialized place for high-altitude technology. As he thought of this, a small flicker of hope began to rise in Joe's heart. Upon arrival, we see that the aviation department building is absolutely swarming with people. The network was in total chaos, and Zach's office didn't look like an office at all. Instead, it resembled a wartime command post in the heat of a major offensive. Phones rang incessantly while people rushed about, making the place as lively as a crowded market. Everyone there looked as though they had been injected with a sudden, frantic burst of energy. His face was a mask of pure concentration, practically radiating the need to bring everyone together. An aide approached, noting that the engine report required the minister's immediate signature. Another voice interrupted, asking him to review the improvement plan for Launch Base No. 3. Ben sat heavily in his chair, feeling the weight of the entire department on his shoulders. With one hand on the phone and eyes fixed on the endless documents, he looked ready to explode. Suddenly, an excited voice drifted in from the doorway, breaking the tense atmosphere. He greeted the newcomer, Joe, wondering what could have possibly brought him there at such a time. Joe mentioned the South Star No. 3 chip, asking the minister how he liked the sound of that. He urged Ben to take a look, claiming he had finally fixed the legendary South Star number 3. Ben was skeptical, reminding him that the South Star project had been cancelled long ago. He questioned where and how such a repair was even possible, given the chip's excellent new performance. Joe explained that our laboratory had already completed the preliminary verification work on the hardware. The precision and anti-interference capabilities, he promised, would definitely come as a surprise. Ben sighed, telling Joe that he simply didn't have the time for idle chatter right now. He gestured to his desk, where the documents had piled up into a literal mountain of paperwork. He told Joe to see for himself, insisting he had no time to play games today. Joe stood his ground, insisting he had truly fixed it, despite the minister's obvious annoyance. Ben's displeasure finally boiled over as he told Joe once more to drop the subject. The South Star number 3 project had been given a death sentence by the higher-ups years ago. Any repair would require a massive amount of money, manpower, and resources they simply didn't have. And in the end, there was no guarantee that the project could even be finished successfully. But Joe insisted he had truly fixed it, urging Ben to take the device immediately. Ben snapped back, telling him that if it really worked, Joe could keep it as a gift. Ben pushed the box away dismissively, and Joe's expression darkened in an instant. A wave of pure frustration surged through Joe, rising from his feet to the top of his head. Without another word, he turned around and marched out of the office, clutching the box. Meanwhile, another figure emerged from the building, joining Joe and the security guard outside. We see that both of their faces were grim, each looking more miserable than the other. Joe muttered to himself, wondering why Ben was just as stubborn as the old director. He complained that Ben's obsession with protocol made him even harder to deal with than his predecessor. Joe felt that no matter how much he tried to persuade him, Ben simply wouldn't be swayed. Talking about the South Star number 3 to him was like playing a harp for an ox. Just as the two of them reached the courtyard, they overheard someone nearby speaking. The stranger asked if they were cursing the South Star project, the ambitious high-tech dream from years ago. But as we know, it was eventually cancelled. Joe turned his head and locked eyes with the man. To be honest, the man's expression was more unsettling than a ghost's. The stranger greeted them politely, asking if they had indeed just mentioned the South Star number 3. When Joe looked up at the newcomer, he found himself momentarily stunned into silence. He didn't recognize the man, but the insignia on his shoulders told him everything he needed to know. Joe quickly straightened up, greeting the official and confirming that this was indeed the South Star chip. Joe explained that this was already their 7th visit to an engineering institute. He held up the South Star number 3 chip, which had only just been repaired. But he complained that Ben, that stubborn old man, was simply unwilling to accept the delivery. Ben kept insisting the chip was a fake, leaving Joe wondering what on earth he was thinking. Joe hurried to greet the official and quickly pulled out his small box containing the South Star number 3. The official recalled that the project had indeed been scrapped quite some time ago. However, Joe proudly claimed that their research institute had finally overcome the technical hurdles. They had updated the chip's technology, and now its precision was as sharp as a needle, or a fly, if you prefer. It possessed such strong anti-interference capabilities that it would keep working even if the sky fell down. Most importantly, he noted that it now featured its own independent algorithm. At last, Joe had found the perfect opportunity to vent all his pent-up frustration. His excited, rapid-fire presentation was, to be honest, quite an impressive performance. The official, General Sam, was stunned as he listened. He was a man built for leading troops into battle. But when it came to complex scientific data, he didn't understand a single word of it. Joe asked how he would ever dare to lie, explaining that if this were installed in a missile, it would hit exactly where it was aimed, even if used in individual soldier equipment. A soldier could head deep behind enemy lines to mark a precise position, while remaining in constant contact with the command center at all times. It was perfect, yet we see the expression on Sam's face begin to shift in that moment. What started as mild interest quickly transformed into the look of a man facing a great enemy. General Sam's skepticism had turned into a final, lingering shock. He couldn't help but catch his breath. He turned around in a bit of a hurry, realizing this technology, with its lethal precision, was a dream come true. Super strong anti-interference and an independent communication channel. Every word Joe spoke hit its mark perfectly. In his heart, Sam wondered if Joe could truly be held responsible for such bold claims. Joe assured him that, as the director of the 7th Research Institute, he stood by his word. And really, how could anyone doubt the word of such an important director? Sam decided right then that he was willing to provide special funding for the project. He promised to fully support mass production. If those special funds weren't enough, he would personally request a batch of supplementary funds for Joe's team. The goal was to promote research, provided their troops were the very first to use it. And in the short term, they wouldn't be allowed to share it with anyone else. However, Joe explained that mass production wasn't possible yet because of the chip's encryption. Their current logical calculations were independent, forming a completely new and unique system. It was a key that could open the door to the future, but this particular key was special. At the moment, they only had one, and to be honest, they weren't entirely certain of everything yet. They were still studying the internal structure of this key, which needed to connect with satellites in the sky. Sam told him not to worry, promising to enlist the help of the nation's top research institutes. He simply couldn't believe that their great country wouldn't be able to produce something so small. But Joe shook his head, insisting that those research institutes wouldn't be able to do it. Sam was baffled, wondering what he meant by suggesting the country's best institutes weren't up to the task. Sam insisted he would find someone capable, refusing to believe such a tiny chip could defeat them. Joe's eyebrows furrowed into a tight, worried knot as he listened. In his eyes, having a finished product was one thing, but replicating the task was quite another. Even with the blueprint right in front of you, you simply cannot just copy something this advanced. He told the general quite plainly that the National Research Institutes truly weren't up to the challenge. When asked who could possibly do it, Joe suggested an appliance repair shop. Sam's voice suddenly spiked in volume, his disbelief echoing through the room. What on earth? For a moment, he genuinely felt as though his hearing was starting to fail him. The very things that the country's top research institutes were unable to accomplish. He wanted to hand over to a simple neighborhood repair shop? He asked if Joe was joking, reminding him that this involved the entire nation's security. This was, after all, a cutting-edge project that would define their future strategic direction. Joe admitted that he knew how ridiculous his suggestion sounded to a reasonable person, but he couldn't quite find the words to explain the situation just yet. He suggested they take a trip so Sam could see for himself. Meanwhile, at the repair shop, the air was thick with the sharp, nostalgic scent of burnt plastic and solder. A young man held tiny tweezers, carefully placing a capacitor smaller than a grain of rice. He was busy restoring an old amplifier from the 1980s, a relic of a bygone era. By successfully repairing the vintage device, he earned 2 more technology points. His current total had now reached 1,940 technology points. As he set his tweezers down, a cold, mechanical voice echoed in his mind. He wondered how many days had passed, fixing nothing but rice cookers and induction stoves. His technology points were growing slower than a snail, which was quite frustrating. He thought back to the last time he repaired a lithography machine and that advanced chip. He couldn't help but notice how much faster other people's technology points seemed to grow. At this rate, he felt he would never even see the construction plans for a starship. He couldn't even scrape together enough points for the price of a single exoskeleton. Just then, a heavy military vehicle came to a firm halt right in front of the shop door. Joe looked out at the monotonous street, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. The general looked at the endless, dusty street before him and frowned deeply. Joe explained they had arrived, despite the messy street and the shouting street vendors. There weren't many people around, and it looked like any other unremarkable little side street. Sam asked if this was the secret base, wondering if Joe was worried about being discovered. He wanted to know where the entrance was and what secret password they needed to use. Joe clarified that there was no secret base, much to the general's likely disappointment. There was no hidden entrance either. This humble repair shop was their actual destination. Sam stared at Joe, asking if he truly thought this was the time for jokes. The National Research Institute couldn't fix the problem, yet he was brought to this rundown place. With the military exercises about to begin, the pressure was becoming almost unbearable. Sam suddenly exploded in anger after a moment of silence, feeling his time was being wasted. Joe urged the general to stay calm, reminding him that their Nando number 3 was repaired right here. And that wasn't all. The precision of that lithography machine from a few days ago was also adjusted in this shop. He truly believed that if it couldn't be fixed here, then no place in the world could manage it. Sam was taken aback, asking in disbelief if they could actually repair lithography machines here. He was instantly stunned, as everyone knows just how impossibly complex those machines are. The idea that this rundown place could handle such high-tech equipment seemed absurd, to say the least. He took a long, hard look at Joe, who served as the director of the 7th Research Institute. Given his high-ranking position within the department, Joe wasn't the type to play practical jokes. With such a reputation on the line, he surely wouldn't deceive the general just to visit a shack like this. Sam finally relented, deciding they should head inside and take a look for themselves. However, he warned that if things weren't as promised, even Joe's high status wouldn't save him from being fired. Sam straightened his uniform and began walking toward the humble repair shop with a stern expression. Joe let out a long sigh of relief, signaling for his assistant to follow them inside. Inside, the system immediately detected reparable items, starting with a tactical flashlight that had a short circuit. The internal circuit board was fried, but to our protagonist, that was a simple enough fix. Next were tactical goggles with a failing thermal imaging layer and a specialized microcommunicator. The signal reception template was badly damaged, making the device little more than a paperweight. As they walked in, the protagonist scanned the equipment carried by the man standing next to Joe. These were all high-end military supplies, and it was clear the man in charge held a very high rank. He was clearly a heavy hitter from the army, but Joe simply greeted him like an old friend. Our protagonist greeted Joe warmly, asking how his health had been since they last saw each other. Even though he didn't see Joe often, he knew that the customer is king, so a little courtesy was required. Joe replied that his health was good, and more importantly, the chips were working perfectly as well. He noted that everything repaired by the shop owner, Alex, had been functioning without a single hitch. They had conducted exhaustive tests back at the lab, and the performance was actually better than the original version. Sam, standing to the side, remained silent, wondering if Joe could tell him something he didn't already know. He had expected the shop owner to be at least 50, not some kid barely in his 20s. To be honest, he also expected to see specialized precision instruments scattered around the shop. Instead, upon entering, he found only the smell of rust and the faint scent of burnt plastic hanging in the air. In Sam's eyes, the young man seemed smooth-talking and superficial, perhaps even a bit arrogant. The idea that this boy was some high-level expert seemed completely ridiculous to him. Joe tried to intervene, reminding the general that the work hadn't even begun yet. Sam turned to leave, warning Joe that they would be settling their accounts later for this waste of time. But then, Alex spoke up, calling out to the bodyguard standing right next to the general. He pointed out that the tactical flashlight on the man's belt had a fried circuit board, as did his goggles. The thermal imaging layer was peeling off, making them about as useful as a blindfold in the middle of the night. And he didn't stop there, noting that the signal membrane in the man's microcommunicator was also burnt out. He remarked casually that the man should be careful it doesn't explode. His voice wasn't loud, but his words reached everyone's ears clearly, especially those of the general's personal bodyguard. The guard looked at him in utter disbelief, wondering how this stranger could possibly know all that. The guard quickly reported to the general that his flashlight had indeed broken accidentally during the night. He explained that during training a few days ago, both his protective goggles and his communicator had also failed. He had originally intended to replace them today, but their sudden change in route had left him with no time. Sam was furious, asking how he could break such vital equipment when he was supposed to be on a mission. He accused the man of treating the assignment like a walk in the park by failing to report or replace the gear. On a real battlefield, he noted, such negligence would turn a soldier into nothing more than a moving target. Sam was already incensed, and at that moment, he pointed his finger directly at the bodyguard's nose. He began to scold him harshly, but then, Sam suddenly froze as a realization struck him. Neither of them had said a single word about the broken equipment since the moment they walked through the door. How could this young man possibly know these things? He demanded to know how Alex had found out. Sam finally took notice of him, his eyes narrowing as he stared fiercely at Alex. Years of combat experience caused the cold, intimidating aura of the old soldier to erupt instantly. Joe, standing off to the side, was also instantly terrified by the sudden shift in tension. He feared that Sam might give the order for the bodyguards to take action right then and there. Alex simply asked if he'd ever seen a good person who needed to walk around with a bodyguard. He followed up by stating that he didn't care what position the man held in the military. This was his shop. To be perfectly honest, your rank meant nothing to him within these four walls. He told them that here, even a dragon must stay coiled and a tiger must stay crouched. If they didn't like it, they could leave. Hearing this, Joe was left completely dumbfounded. He pleaded with Alex not to be so inflexible, reminding him that he was speaking to a high-ranking general. He warned that if Alex was willing, he wouldn't just kick him out, but would toss him straight into the steel furnace to be melted down. Sam fixed his gaze on those eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. To be honest, he found none. Beyond the initial shock of the confrontation, a deep sense of disbelief began to settle over the old soldier. For so many years, he reflected, no one had dared to challenge him. Not since his days as a fresh recruit in the academy. When his captain had kicked him to teach him a technique, had anyone actually dared to speak to him this way. The bodyguard standing nearby couldn't restrain himself any longer, wondering how this shopkeeper dared to speak so boldly. He clenched his fists and charged directly toward Alex, ready to put an end to the disrespect. Sam barked out a command, asking if he had given permission to move, stopping the guard in his tracks before he could reach him. The guard's feet halted instantly at the general's shout, and he immediately retreated to his original position. Alex asked what on earth they were doing, reminding them that this was a repair shop, not a boxing ring. He told them quite plainly that if they wanted a box, they should go find a gym elsewhere. On the outside, he appeared perfectly calm, but in reality, he was already terrified by the display of aggression. He realized then that the bodyguards protecting these high-ranking officials were cut from a different cloth entirely. Under those baggy suits, their muscles had bulged instantly. He knew that if one of those fists hit his head, it would be over. In fact, our story would have likely come to a very abrupt and painful end right then and there. Joe quickly intervened, addressing him as Boss Alex and asking if he had repaired the Nanda No. 3 chip. He explained that they wanted him to install that specific chip into a warhead to give it a precise positioning function. The request was simple enough, though the implications of working on military hardware were anything but. Alex was taken aback by the explosive nature of the request, wondering exactly what they intended to do with it. Suddenly, his interest was piqued. This was a massive task, clearly intended for use on the front lines of a war. Joe explained that they had a team called Blue Storm, a name that Alex should have been quite familiar with. They had been on a losing streak lately, and this time, they were determined to secure a victory. Joe looked at him with a deadly serious expression and asked if he was actually capable of doing it. Alex knew that if he said no, the old man's heart might just stop right then and there. He was certain he could do it, of course, but he wondered what exactly he would get out of the deal. He decided he needed a bit more than just a thank you, so he held up 5 fingers and gave them a wave. Joe assumed he meant $500 and immediately reached for his phone to scan the payment code. He pulled out his phone with genuine excitement, eager to get the transaction over with. But as he prepared to pay, Alex stopped him, questioning where he got the idea of $500 from. This time, he demanded $50,000, a price jump that left Joe wondering why the cost had skyrocketed. Everything had been $500 before, so he couldn't understand why the price was so high this time. Alex simply replied that he didn't like the general's attitude, especially since the man had dared to be so rude. He pointed at Joe, noting with a hint of disdain that $50,000 was actually a bargain for this kind of work. The general agreed, deciding that if the job was done right, $50,000 was a price he was willing to pay. In fact, he promised to give Alex another $50,000 as a bonus once the task was successfully completed. With the crisp notification of the bank transfer, Alex officially accepted this rather daring commission. It was a simple philosophy. He took people's money to solve their problems and keep disaster at bay. However, he made it clear that this particular job couldn't be done in his cramped little shop. He insisted on going to their facility to finish the work, which immediately raised a few eyebrows. That was a high-security core project site, after all, and they had no idea what he was really planning to do. If any core information were to leak out, it would be a massive problem for everyone involved. Alex pointed out that since Joe seemed like such an important official, he surely wouldn't want a Nano number 3 chip out in the open. Especially not inside a bullet. At the very least, there should be a proper projectile involved. He asked if that was really the kind of thing they wanted appearing in the middle of the city. If this ever came to light, Alex joked that he would end up as the lead story on the nightly news. Once again, Joe found himself feeling completely overwhelmed by the young man's logic. Only this time, he was actually suffering under the weight of his own racing thoughts. In his rush to install the chip, he hadn't considered the security implications of doing it in a back alley shop at all. Alex agreed that the facility was the better choice and told them to wait just a moment. He told the two men he was going to pack his things and headed straight into the back warehouse. Joe and his companion stood there, looking quite stunned as they waited for him. They had assumed he would be packing heavy luggage or perhaps some specialized equipment. Instead, he emerged carrying nothing but a single, tattered cloth bag. Joe asked in disbelief if that was really all he was bringing and what he planned to do about the rest. Alex simply tapped his head, noting that his brain was the most powerful tool he possessed. He gave Joe a knowing look, turned his head, and walked right out the front door of the shop. Joe figured that was just how technical experts were. As long as he could do the job, his quirks didn't matter. Alex told them that whatever he said went, then paused to ask if they had actually walked there. He wondered where the car was, half expecting a military vehicle if planes and tanks weren't available. Joe quickly nodded in agreement and hurried to lead the way to their transport. Joe signaled to the security guard, and before long, an ordinary car and a military vehicle arrived. Alex noted that it was quite a novelty, as he had never actually ridden in a military vehicle before. The path was cleared, and we see the two cars racing down the open road. He leaned back in the rear seat and closed his eyes to rest, mentally installing the chip into the projectile. To him, this job was already proving to be much more interesting than simply repairing a wave generator. He knew the flight path of a conventional warhead projectile, especially in its terminal phase, was a delicate thing. It is affected by countless factors: air currents, temperature, humidity, and even the density of the air itself. Then there was the movement of the target to consider, among various other complications. The so-called terminal correction is the final stage when the projectile is just about to strike its target. An internal micropower device is used to adjust its attitude and correct any deviations in real time. A few hours later, the two cars slowly entered a heavily guarded zone, far from the city's prying eyes. There were high-voltage power grids and sentries posted every few steps, maintaining a constant watch. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter with loaded weapons, and as soon as Alex entered the facility, he felt a heavy, disciplined atmosphere. It was, quite clearly, a serious military installation. The air of authority was dominant as Joe announced that they had finally arrived. Alex stepped out of the car with his tattered repair bag, and upon entering the building, he found himself genuinely surprised. To be honest, it was far more elegant than his own cluttered workshop. It was a massive structure with an incredible amount of space and high-tech infrastructure. Various classified instruments, many of which he couldn't even name, were humming with activity. Everywhere he looked, personnel in various specialized uniforms were busy at their stations. The personnel were busy at their stations, but our protagonist's sudden appearance immediately caught everyone's attention. Whispers began to spread through the room, with many asking if that was indeed General Joe leading the way. They wondered who the young man behind him could be, though no one seemed to have an answer. To them, Alex didn't look like anyone important. He looked more like a kid from the countryside. Others quickly hushed the skeptics, noting that anyone accompanied by General Joe couldn't possibly be ordinary. Joe called out to a man named Wayne, ordering everyone to stop what they were doing and gather around. In no time at all, dozens of military researchers in dark uniforms had lined up to meet the newcomers. Joe introduced the dean of the 7th Research Institute, Stephen, along with another lead researcher named Arthur. When Alex was introduced as a simple repair shop owner, every eye in the room turned toward him at once. They felt extremely perplexed, wondering what on earth a repairman was doing in a high-security facility like this. Joe asked Dean Stephen to present the project to the group, and the dean stepped forward to address the staff. He explained that their presence there today was entirely because of a very specific piece of technology. With those words, Stephen reached into a small, secure box and pulled something out. He revealed the chip, prompting the staff to murmur in confusion, as they had never seen anything like it. It looked incredibly high-tech and unusual, but they couldn't fathom what its exact purpose was. Everyone craned their necks, staring at the object in Stephen's hand with a mixture of intense curiosity and doubt. The confusion remained. They still couldn't understand why a repairman was involved in such a high-level briefing. The researchers questioned why this was happening, especially since they thought this specific line of research had been halted. They had been told they lacked the artificial intelligence technology, the funding, and most importantly, the time. Wayne, acting as the base commander, immediately took the chip to examine it for himself. Wayne examined it carefully, noting that it was crafted from a single, seamless piece, exactly what one would expect from such advanced tech. He admitted he had never seen this specific technology before, and the hundreds of materials used were anything but ordinary. It didn't follow a standard design. Instead, it appeared to be made of some sort of high-grade carbon material. He marveled at the precision, noting it had to be at least 3 millimeters or less, a feat of engineering, to be sure. The questions began to fly. Which laboratory had produced this? And more importantly, what was the cost? Then there was the issue of heat dissipation. With such a high level of integration, once the chip started running, the heat generation would undoubtedly be massive, posing a significant challenge for any cooling system. Within seconds, the room erupted as everyone began shouting and crowding around to get a better look. Even though this was a strict military base, the female researchers here had been recruited from the finest institutes in the country. Confused, they turned to Dean Stephen, asking him to properly introduce the supposed repair shop owner standing among them. Looking at this group, it was clear they could all see the sheer complexity of the chip with their own eyes. It seemed that this little object really did possess some extraordinary qualities. When asked for their thoughts, they apologized to the general, admitting they didn't fully understand it, only that the device was far from ordinary, and the institute capable of producing it must be world-class. Old Wayne gave a bitter smile as he spoke, and the others nodded in agreement, their faces etched with uncertainty. Each researcher looked more baffled than the last, and the atmosphere in the room grew noticeably tense. Joe had always believed his staff was the best of the best, but he hadn't expected a single small chip to stump them. Since his team couldn't even begin to decipher it, he turned to Alex and asked him to explain the technology to them. The general took a deep breath, shifting his gaze toward our young protagonist who was standing quietly to the side. Alex, for his part, had simply been observing his surroundings with calm curiosity since the moment they arrived. We see Alex looking around, noting that the equipment and environment here were worlds apart from his humble repair shop. He couldn't help but think that using such high-end gear with this group of thugs was a complete waste of talent. With a faint, amused smile, he stepped toward the crowd, took the chip back, and told them it was quite all right. He had suspected they wouldn't be able to understand it, though he hadn't expected their confusion to be quite this profound. The researchers all frowned at his words, wondering just who this young man thought he was. After all, a doctorate was the bare minimum requirement to even step foot in a place like this. To them, he looked like he hadn't even finished college, so why was he speaking with such staggering arrogance? He wasn't afraid of sounding bold as he explained that this was the Beidou 3, a name they surely recognized. He explained that the central processing units utilized a complex sequence of 114 cores. It was perfectly normal that they didn't understand it, as a 114-core sequence was something entirely new to them. They were desperate to know how the heat dissipation was managed given such an incredibly high level of integration. Alex clarified that he had modified it using copper foils and thermal superconducting materials. This allowed the device to maintain complete stability during daily operations in the real world. He pointed out the micro holes in the chip, which served as the inlets and outlets for miniature thermoelectric generation. These could actually convert the heat generated by the computing process back into electrical energy. This achieved a self-sufficient system that powered itself, as he explained with a remarkably calm expression. But no one else in the room felt calm at all, especially not the director, Dean Stephen.